play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is October 28th, 2025. This is the news report for October 27th. Here are the top U.S. news highlights for the past 24 hours. Supreme Court emergency filing. Copyright Office Director, the Trump administration, asked the U.S. Supreme Court to allow it to fire the director of the U.S. Copyright Office after a D.C. Circuit ruling that the director could not be unilaterally removed. This is an immediate institutional power legal fight that could change executive control precedents for federal agency leadership. Federal court rulings requiring restoration of funds. A federal judge ordered the administration to restore millions in federal grants intended for school mental health counselors. Judge's order requires release of funds. That ruling directly affects the distribution of public health and education resources. Ongoing litigation load. Trackers and litigation projects show how many active suits against the administration and frequent emergency filings in multiple courts. Courts continue to block or limit several administrative actions, numerous active cases affecting policy and federal programs. Federal reporting and research remain focused on far-right and militia-style violent extremism as an ongoing threat to both civilians and law enforcement. Policy and operational responses continue to evolve. A trial was delayed for a man accused of fabricating a death threat against President Trump in a scheme to deport another person. A reminder that political threat allegations continue to move through the courts. That's weird. I don't even care. That's not high on my priorities list to really be digging into, but that's just weird. They made a death threat towards the president to try and get someone else deported, I'm pretty sure I just read. Deployments, federal forces ongoing and legal pushback. There have been multiple federal and National Guard deployments to U.S. cities this year, including recent deployments and plans and references to Chicago, Memphis, and other cities. Several deployments have prompted legal challenges and court blocks. Appeals courts and lower courts have been split in rulings on federal authority to order such forces. Monitor active litigation. Courts have recently blocked or limited at least some deployments. Service members push back. At least some National Guard members have publicly said they will not turn on fellow citizens. Court rulings have delayed or limited deployments in places like Illinois. Executive threats and budget maneuvers. The administration has pursued funding cancellations and other executive moves that courts have frequently checked. Some actions are being appealed to higher courts, and the administration has periodically used threats to withhold or redirect funding as a lever. Those legal threats are material to civil rights and service delivery outcomes. Institutional control fights. Copyright Office example. The High Court filing to allow firing of the Copyright Office director is a live example of the administration attempting to expand unilateral executive control over independent agencies. This can create downstream risks to institutional independence and citizens' access to services and protections. Court orders restoring of school counselor grants. This shows how litigation over policy is directly altering the flow of services that affect children's mental health and well-being. Ongoing disputes over federal funding and shutdown-related actions are creating tangible disruption risks, like holiday travel and federal services. Courts and continuations of litigation are shaping which programs run and which do not. Travelers and service users should expect targeted disruptions tied to budgets, status changes. Where the administration has sought to withhold or reallocate funds, courts have sometimes pushed back. These rulings directly affect roadblocks or continuations of infrastructure and public programs. Respiratory viruses surveillance. The CDC's Respiratory Virus Activity Tracker remains the authoritative source. Current CDC pages remain active, with state-by-state activity levels for COVID-19, influenza, and RSV. Separately, the U.S. has had recent measles case counts reported. CDC data through recent reporting shows windows, sizable case totals this season. Public health capacity, vaccination, and surveillance remains an important watch item. That would be due to there not being enough people. Sanctions and geopolitical moves. In the last several days, there have been notable actions and reactions around U.S. sanctions, for example, on Russia, and allied responses. These continue to affect energy markets and military logistics surrounding Ukraine and diplomatic tensions. Expect more diplomatic pushback and public statements from affected states. The administration is simultaneously a plaintiff and defendant in many cases, from challenges over agency firings, like the Copyright Office, to spending on program cancellations. Several cases are in federal courts. A subset are being appealed to the Supreme Court, and trackers indicate the caseload is large and active. Expect new emergency filings and appeals in the coming days. I post a lot on my Blue Sky, and I did add there's like litigation trackers that show you there is a shit ton of lawsuits against the Trump administration. Shock events. The most immediately consequential shock items in the last 24 hours center on high court emergency filings and court rulings that change immediate agency authority or funding flows. See the Copyright Office filing and grants restoration. These are institutional shock events with rapid legal consequences. Lewd and inappropriate behavior. Nothing overly noticeable from Donald Trump in the last 24 hours. Watch the Supreme Court docket. The administration's emergency filings, Copyright Office, and other matters could produce near-term rulings, changing agency removal doctrine and executive reach. Monitor federal court orders affecting deployment of National Guard and federal forces. Ongoing litigation could limit or permit further federalized deployments to cities with immediate civil rights and policing consequences. Public health surveillance pages for state-level respiratory virus activity and outbreak alerts. These are best sourced state-by-state impacts and are being updated on their surveillance pages at the CDC. Litigation trackers for real-time status on many cases naming the administration. These trackers show which cases are being blocked, appealed, or pending. Emergency Supreme Court move to allow firing of Copyright Office Director. What happened? The administration filed an emergency petition. Wow, it's an emergency. It's an emergency. We need to get rid of the person in charge of copyrights. It's an emergency, according to the Trump administration. Emergency Supreme Court move to allow the firing of Copyright Office Director. What the fuck? The administration filed an emergency petition at the Supreme Court asking permission to remove the Register of Copyrights after lower court rulings blocked unilateral removal. Why this matters, it's a live test of executive power over independent agency leadership. It could reset removal doctrine and accelerate other agency purges. Why the fuck is Trump targeting the person in charge of copyrights? Is it because one of his family members was like copying somebody's logo and got caught or what? Like, that's just appeals court activity continuing to block federal National Guard deployments in cities. Appeals courts and district rulings continue to issue temporary blocks and mixed orders around deployments. Chicago, Portland, other city disputes are still active litigation. Some rulings allow troops to remain in place but prohibit deployments. The legal situation is shifting hour by hour. Why it matters, any sudden change could produce federal troop mobilizations inside U.S. borders or constrain them, direct civil risk and governance implications. Quiet push from former DOJ officials about vindictive prosecution narrative. What happened? Over 100 former Justice Department officials signed a public call asking for dismissal of a prosecution they describe as vindictive, linked to litigation around former FBI leadership. Why it matters, this is an unusual, organized legal establishment intervention that can shape prosecutorial optics and appellate strategy. It's a legal political pressure point that's not headline dominating but influential. News aggregation coverage of the sign-on was published about 1 hour ago. Power outage spikes in multiple states. Live infrastructure stress. What happened? Live outage aggregators show tens of thousands of customers currently without power in multiple states. California, North Carolina, Florida, Washington among the high counts. Several regional utilities reporting large ongoing outages overnight. Yo, we're coming up on winter. I don't know how cold it is in other states, but here in Colorado, it's starting to get cold. Why it matters, these can cascade into public safety issues, hospitals backup, pump, food supply, emergency response, and other issues are worth local monitoring, where you cover populations at risk. Poweroutage.us is the website. I will also post this to my Blue Sky. Alright, I just did it. I did it now. Local judge extended block and updates on Chicago National Guard legal fight. Regional ruling. A judge extended an order limiting Guard deployment in the Chicago area while the dispute over federal authority continues to wind through appeals. Why it matters, local court orders are the operational constraint on federal plans. They're a key source of last-minute changes to mobilization plans. Measles and vaccine preventable disease surveillance reminders, CDC updates. CDC surveillance pages have recent state-level updates. Measles data page was updated within the reporting cycle. Public health trackers continue to show elevated measles activity this year versus prior years. Localized outbreaks remain an under-the-radar public health risk that can stress local clinics and schools, especially in under-vaccinated communities. State-level legislative moves quietly advancing restrictive measures. Several state legislative efforts, abortion waiting period bills, other access-related bills are moving in committees and may not be widely reported nationally yet. Coverage from state trackers and local outlets flags a handful of bills to watch. State laws can rapidly alter civil rights and health access at scales. These are often under the radar until inactive. Large regional outage report Houston and Centerpoint substantial customer impact. Localized shock. What happened? A large Centerpoint outage in the Houston area knocked out power to 100,000 customers overnight in some reports. Utility crews remain active. Concentrated urban outages create immediate public safety stressors, e.g. sheltering, transit, and hospitals, and can be a useful beat for on-the-ground reporting. Today, the stock markets closed with the S&P 500 at $685.24, up 1.19%. The Dow Jones closed at $475.35, up 0.66%. Invesco QQQ Trust closed at $628.09, up 1.78%. Here are the top trade and economic highlights for the past 24 hours. Inflation remains elevated at 3% year over year. In September, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, reported that consumer prices rose 3% year over year in September, the fastest pace since January. Core inflation, excluding food and energy, held at 3%. Why this matters: the inflation print influences how the Federal Reserve sets interest rate policy and affects cost pressures for customers and businesses. Whether inflation begins to accelerate further or shows signs of easing, each would shift the Fed's stance. Business surveys show the U.S. economy expanding but confidence waning. According to S&P Global's October Flash Purchasing Managers Indices, the services PMI rose to 55.2 from 54.2 and manufacturing to 52.2 from 52.0, signaling expansion, but business confidence metrics remain near their lowest in 3 years, largely because of policy uncertainty, especially tariffs. Growth is still positive, but weak confidence may damp investment, hiring, and longer-term economic momentum. Whether business confidence rebounds or deteriorates further, and whether manufacturing exports are hit by trade and tariff headwinds. We did manage to catch the kittens. I adopted one of them out. One of them is still here. Right now, it is best friends with my cat, who is also very young. She is not in heat. She is calling the other kitten. She kind of freaks out when she can't see him. So they're like stuck together, like glue. I don't get it. But that's what that is. If you hear cats communicating, she's calling the baby. The U.S. economic calendar aggregator lists the September durable goods orders release at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, October 27th. Durable goods orders reflect business investment and manufacturing demand given trade tariff risks. They're key to gauge supply chain stress. Whether orders come in weaker than consensus, which would raise worries for the industrial sector, or stronger, which would bolster growth signals. House Price Index and other housing-related data on deck. The calendar shows that the U.S. House Price Index for August is scheduled alongside other housing data releases this week. Housing is sensitive to interest rates, consumer income pressures, and credit conditions, all relevant to consumer and infrastructure as well as economic risks beats. If housing price growth slows significantly, that may indicate a strain in the broader consumer sector. Trade and tariff policy continues to weigh on exports and business sentiment. The S&P Global commentary noted that though the economy is growing, high tariffs remain a drag on exports and are undermining business confidence. Trade tensions have become a structural risk for sectors reliant on global supply chains and for U.S. export competitiveness. Whether the administration announces new tariff actions or trade deal breakthroughs, which would impact manufacturing, export volumes, and inflation. Data release disruptions from the federal shutdown amplify uncertainty. The ongoing 2025 U.S. government shutdown is delaying or complicating regular economic data flows, including from agencies like the BLS and Census. Incomplete or delayed data hampers timely analysis, weakens policymaker signaling, and increases risk that markets and makers misread economic conditions. Whether key reports are delayed further or released in staggered form, and whether this adds volatility or contributes to surprise economic readings. Overall takeaway: the U.S. economy is showing continued expansion, but with significant overhangs, elevated inflation, trade and tariff drag, weak business confidence, and disrupted data flows due to the shutdown. For your economic reporting beat, this means highlight structural risks, consumer price pressures, and the interplay between policy and real-world economic behavior. Here are some additional economic indicators. The Composite Manufacturing Index for the Richmond Fed's 5th District fell to 17 in September, down from, it fell to negative 17 in September, down from negative 7 in August, so it fell by 10 points. That's according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. Within that, new orders dropped to negative 15 from negative 6. Shipments to negative 20 from negative 5. Backlog of orders index fell to negative 21 from 12. Employment decreased to negative 15. Again, that's from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. A steep negative reading signals contraction in that region's manufacturing, may signal earlier regional stress than national numbers reveal, good for tracking supply chain or labor risk. This region covers Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, and the D.C. region. Whether other regional Fed surveys mirror this contraction, indicating broader slowdown, or if this remains isolated, you would need to check for the different regions on how they're reading. I'm looking for my tea. I've got a sore throat. Regional Manufacturing Index, Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Fed Index dropped sharply in October to negative 12.8 from positive 23.2, so it dropped almost 30 points in September. New orders rose modestly to 18.2. Shipments slowed while employment index was just 4.6 and work week contracted. Input prices still elevated. A dramatic month-to-month swing suggests volatility in manufacturing in the Mid-Atlantic region, Eastern PA, New Jersey, and Delaware. This can anticipate national weakness in orders or employment. If this region's weakness spreads or if its contagious regions show disturbance, this could be an early warning sign of broader industrial fragility. Supply Chain Backlog Indicator, Institute for Supply Management, ISM, Services Backlog of Orders Index. In the September Services PMI report, the Backlog of Orders Index services side remained in contraction territory at 47.3, below 50% threshold, but jumped 6.9 points from August's 40.4%. That is according to the Institute for Supply Management. Inventories dropped into contraction 47.8%, indicating firms are cutting inventories after months of buildup. These indicators show firms' service sector order backlogs and inventory behavior, a shift towards inventory drawdown and expanding backlog could foreshadow demand constraints or supply chain restructuring. If the backlog remains low but service sector employment or revenue continue to grow, there may be mismatched signals, risk of overhiring in weak demand environment. Here's the upcoming hazardous weather outlook for the next few days. West, including the Mountain West, Intermountain, and Pacific states. Over the Mountain West into the Rockies, expect wind-driven conditions, especially on Tuesday and Wednesday. For example, at Colorado around Greeley, Colorado high 51, 10 degrees Celsius. So it's 51 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's getting cold. Tuesday with very cold overnight low, 17 degrees, down to negative 8 Celsius. And windy conditions. Pacific states, no large precipitation or severe storm threat noted in national outlooks, but gusty winds may affect exposed ridges or passes. Key hazard, wind and cold if traveling or hiking in remote areas. Unsecured objects and exposed items may be at risk. Cold overnight can cause freezing, especially above 7,000 to 8,000 feet. Central U.S. plains and Midwest, the plains and central states should watch for gusty winds and possibly lower temps with severe convective threat being low. Wind hazard remains. In the Outlook product maps, temperature and wind hazards are flagged rather than heavy rain or flooding or tornadoes. Wind gusts, potential tree limb damage, power outages. Also, colder nights may stress populations unprotected from lower temperatures. South and southeast, no major severe storm outbreak flagged in the near term. Tornado and hail risk remains low according to the Severe Weather Outlook website. Still, for coastal or Gulf states, check marine forecasts. Gusty winds or elevated surf might accompany frontal passages, though no major hurricane level threat identified. Local wind and shoreline issues may be scattered severe storms if localized setups form. Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, the region likewise shows no high risk of widespread severe storms in the next 3 days. Focus shifts to colder overnight lows, possibly early season frost or freeze in some inland areas. Cold overnight, possibly early fall freeze, which could affect agriculture, outdoor equipment, or vulnerable populations. It's going to be windy across several states. So everybody get ready to have your hair blown around. Don't bother styling it. Alright, and then in international news, we've got Asia Pacific. Anthony Albanese meets Li Qiang. Australia-China talks. It sounds like the beginning of like a Street Fighter. Anthony Albanese meets Li Qiang. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese held a bilateral meeting with Chinese Premier Li Qiang at the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur. The agenda included Australia's US-backed $8.5 billion of rare earth critical minerals agreement, trade cooperation, green energy links, and a recent military aviation confrontation over the South China Sea. The deal signals deepening Australia-US alignment in supply chain strategy, especially minerals vital to high-tech and defense, and reflects attempts to manage Chinese influence via diplomacy rather than confrontation. The South China Sea incident adds a security overlay that could provoke escalation if mishandled. Whether Australia leverages its critical mineral supply chain position further in U.S. strategy vis-a-vis China, how China responds in trade, expansive diplomacy, risk of further air and naval confrontations. Trump meets Japan's Sanae Takaishi. I don't know who this person is, but I'm not optimistic about this because she's all trying to do Japan first and shit. Like, I find that to be very strange. She's on some white supremacist shit over there in Japan. She's the Prime Minister of the Liberal Democratic Party since October 2025. So who knows? Maybe she's maneuvering. I don't know. President Trump and Japan's newly elected Prime Minister Takaishi signed two major agreements, one strengthening U.S.-Japan alliance described as a golden age deal, and another focused on securing critical mineral and rare earth supplies, trade tension relief, e.g. easing tariffs. Ford F-150 purchases by Japan was also part of the package. These deals underscore how trade, defense, and resource security are blending in U.S. foreign policy strategy in East Asia, especially as U.S.-China technology commodity rivalry intensifies. Japan's participation suggests growing regional hedging. What to watch, how China reacts economically and militarily to deeper U.S.-Japan resource strategic ties, whether Japan delivers on the Ford F-150 truck purchase and how that is received politically and industrially in both countries. Europe, Russia, and Ukraine. Russia tests new nuclear-capable missile. Ukraine plans ceasefire dialogue. According to live coverage, Russia under Putin announced the testing of a new nuclear-capable powered cruise missile. Simultaneously, Ukraine claims it launched nearly 200 drones into Russia overnight. Ukrainian President Zelensky says a ceasefire plan will be worked on in the next 10 days. The missile test escalates the strategic stakes of the conflict. Drone strikes suggest Ukraine is expanding tactics. The ceasefire plan signal may be a strategic reset or precursor to negotiation. This affects global deterrence, non-proliferation, and alliance cohesion, NATO and EU. What to watch, whether the ceasefire initiative is serious or a tactical ploy, how NATO responds to missile developments, whether new arms deliveries or sanctions follow, the impact on global arms export pipelines. He is very squeaky when he plays. She's not hurting him. He just squeaks like that. He's like a squeaky toy. Energy and diplomatic pressure on Venezuela. Venezuela has suspended energy agreements with Trinidad and Tobago, calling actions hostile after the arrival of a U.S. warship in Trinidad. This development fits into rising U.S. military diplomatic presence in the region. Latin America remains a theater for U.S., Russian, China contestation. Energy agreements have direct global impact on global commodity flows and regional stability. Increased naval activity signals higher militarization. What to watch, whether Venezuela responds to further suspension or retaliation, potential escalation of military buildup, implications for energy markets and U.S. foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. China, ASEAN, expanded Free Trade Pact. The China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, signed an expanded free trade agreement positioning China as a counterpoint to U.S. protectionist posture. Strengthens. Man, it is like past 1 o'clock in the morning. This strengthens China's regional economic leadership, challenges U.S. trade influence, may shift supply chain alliances and trade investment flows in Southeast Asia. How the U.S. reacts with trade and strategic measures will be something to watch. Whether Southeast Asian nations tilt away from the U.S. effects on rare earth mineral supply networks and tech manufacturing chains. This concludes today's reports. I'm going to go now. Everybody stay safe out there. We'll see you later.
So the Olympics is great. And Johnny, for the others, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny. And we got the World Cup, too. And, it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. I got both of them. I got the Olympics, and I got the World Cup. And I said, it's too bad. One was in 2026, and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election, and now we won, so I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So, Johnny, thank you for the World Cup, and everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment on my videos. And also, don't forget to check out my shop where you can get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, because MAGA's fucking cockroaches. And fuck MAGA. Abolish MAGA. Fuck you, MAGA.